What's up, guys? Thanks for jumping in to the Fantasy Football Outpost. My name is Dallas,
My name's Jay.
and we are back again. This is our tight ends ranking show. If you missed it, go check out our quarterbacks, running backs, and our wide receivers. Those are all done now. I'm trying to get you all these before draft season ends this weekend. This is a half PPR rankings for those of you curious, so make adjustments as needed. But this is our tight end, so we're going to jump it off with our huge surprise at number one being Travis Kelce. So I'm going to go ahead and let Jay kick off on Travis Kelce.
I mean, really, can you have Travis Kelce not at number one? I mean, my response to that is,
Yeah, exactly. It's
but
with his famous line.
oh yeah, no bias here. But again, I am a Kansas City Chiefs fan, and so I am a big Travis Kelce fan, and also I played tight end in college, so I have a little bit of schema just for understanding of the position. But that I don't necessarily draft tight ends better because I play tight end.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of insight of just the ins and outs of the position, and Travis Kelce is to me far and away the best tight end in the NFL. And I mean that in the sense of using your body and space to create separation, to be a target for the quarterback, and to make yourself a big body that can always be open. So when you watch his games, he is the master of using like shoulder angles and almost thinking like for basketball, like someone trying to box you out, like using your body and space to get around that to create space and separation, and using that frame. That I think that George Kittle, who I will talk about in a little bit, I love Kittle, but doesn't quite do that. Just kind of makes up for it in athleticism, which I believe has allowed Kelce to still be a hyper-dominant tight end even up into his 30s. And so for me, that ability combined with having Patrick Mahomes is going to continue. I mean, he signed like, what was that, a 5-year contract?
That's
Crazy like that.
He was somebody that, like in Dynasty, I was starting to question, like, do I go, start looking other ways? Do I try to sell him if I have him? And then they signed that contract. I was like, yeah, he's not going anywhere. I'm keeping him.
Yeah, I mean, he reminds me of, if you think about late Tony Gonzalez, right? I mean, he was dominant when he was younger, but he just kind of kept being good because he was able to just be kind of a old man smart, right? Have the wisdom of the position. And I think it's just no better guy for the number one spot. What's your thoughts on Travis Kelce?
Kelsey's just somebody that is an absolute volume monster at the tight end position. So, like, I mean, you look at, 3 years ago, he was tight end one. I mean, the year after that, he was tight end one. Then last year, I mean, if my projections and analysis is correct, he was also the tight end one. And so this year, I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he might finish as the tight end one. So it's just one of those where, like, I can hear arguments for Kittle maybe finishing above him because certain circumstances happened, volume increased. Maybe they stepped up a little bit better passing down or up in San Francisco. But it's the same boat as Mahomes as the quarterback. Like, although somebody could finish better, you're never going to project that. And Travis Kelce is the closest thing to a sure thing. And he's the one guy that I look at and genuinely don't care to take him over some of these top tier wide receivers. And because I just treat him as my wide receiver one is the way I look at it. I'm like, oh no, my wide receiver one is, insert random guy that's normally a 2 here. I don't care because my wide receiver one is Travis Kelce, production-wise. And then the way I try to spin that and look at it is my wide receiver 3 is my tight end. And is that better than the tight ends I would have got around there? And that's a really good approach to make you feel a lot better because a lot of people tend to steer away from taking the top-tier tight ends because they just don't want to miss out on the talent in other places. But if you look at the just sheer drop-off at the tight end position, production-wise, I mean, you get to a point where you're happy with 8 to 10 points, whereas a wide receiver 3, usually you're happy with like 12 to 14 on a weekly basis. So if your wide receiver 3 is somebody that gets you 12 to 14 and Travis Kelce is your tight end, you have still a better situation than you would have ended up going with a skill player outside of the tight end position early on and then settling for that 8-point-a-week tight end later on. So it's one of those where if you get to that point in that draft and those top-tier guys are gone that you just had your mind set on, don't hesitate to look Kelce and, frankly, Kittle's way for production-wise. But Kelce's just the closest thing to a lock for that production. And then I'll explain a little bit more as we move on to our next guy here, George Kittle, who naturally is going to be our number 2. That segues us right into that. George Kittle is somebody that typically I would have a decent, like, he'd still be my 2, but I would have a bigger spread between him and Kelsey, except for the fact that literally every single wide receiver on the 49ers is injured right now, besides a rookie and some other just guys that have been there. I like Bourne, but that's also a dart throw. He's not anything I'm playing a flag on. So for me, George Kittle is actually, I do the same thing with him as Kelsey. Whereas before the injuries, if Debo was still there, I probably wouldn't have. Just because even though Debo is going to be back soon and early on, there's still going to be uncertainties with injuries. So they're still going to keep Kittle as the focal point there. So I think volume-wise, Kittle's also a very, very safe play. So I've been seeing a lot of them going back-to-back, and I completely understand that. But if it's redraft, Kittle shouldn't be going ahead of Kelsey, but definitely right there with him. So I'll let you go ahead and give your take on Kittle.
Yeah, whenever you're in that draft and you think, I wonder this one I should take Kittle or Kelsey, you should.
Yeah.
Because as soon as it hits your mind, it hits somebody else's mind, and they'll almost never make it back. And I know that for this kind of top couple tier, I have a tier break in my draft where if I'm not getting one of these top 4 guys and a couple to talk about, I'm waiting because the space between, as you see, like tight end 6 and tight end 20 isn't really that much. So as we talk about these first couple of guys, kind of my strategy, if I'm not getting one of these 3 or 4 early guys, I'm waiting for tight end, and Dallas might have a couple more people in his little tight end box. But we talk about George Kittle. I mean, as I said with Kelsey, I mean, I think in 3 years he'll be a Kelsey type if he kind of just keeps refining the craft. I think he's an uber athlete. I think he's strong. He's got great hands, so I think he makes a lot of great plays. But as far as just this season and going forward, even with the question marks at wide receiver for San Francisco, I still have him behind Kelsey. But that's not a knock on Kittle.
Yeah, it's a volume thing. I mean, 100%. Yeah, with San Francisco, I mean, he's their number one target by a large margin. That's what you look for in these top tier tight ends. But like you were saying with Kelsey, I mean, Kelsey's the number one target for the most high-powered offense in football, whereas Kittle is the number one target for the most high-powered rushing offense in football. And so they're still going to get out and get theirs on rushing. And like we were mentioning in the running backs episode, I believe it was, where you don't really realize when a team leads the NFL in rushing, they still pass more than they rush almost always. And so there is still a significant chunk of volume that's there. But that significant chunk is not quite the same chunk that Kelsey gets. But I do think because of the injuries, it's a little bit closer. But yeah, there's no scenario where I'm taking Kittle over Kelsey in the redraft. It's not something I can do. And like you were mentioning on when to take them, you kind of mentioned when you stop looking at tight ends because they fall off. I actually have the similar take to when I start looking at Kelsey and Kittle, as we mentioned our wide receivers. Where after that DeAndre Hopkins, wide receiver 5-6 range, when you start getting into your Galladay, when it's no longer a sure thing, that's usually when I start saying, well, I'm going to go ahead and take the sure thing in Kittle or Kelsey. Because now the wide receivers are a little bit of a question mark. There's no question with these guys. And so it's they're in a tier of their own on the tight ends. And then that transitions us to our next one here that starts the next tier.
Yeah, our number 3 tight end is Mark Andrews. So I had Mark Andrews at my tight end 4, and Dallas had Mark Andrews at his tight end 3. So Dallas, you want to talk a little bit about why you're high on Mark Andrews for this upcoming season?
Yeah, I just think it's the same situation you see with Kittle. He's the number one target on a team that's going to get significant percent of the target share, way higher than you see these other tight ends get, and that's why he's up here in this tier for me. But at the same time, it's going to be a heavily rushing team. But I do think that their rushing comes down quite a bit this year. They're still going to be one of the top teams for sure, but I see Lamar Jackson passing the ball more. I think quite a bit of people do, and if that's the case, I don't see volume starting to get spread around. I really like Devin Duvernay. I mean, I'm literally wearing Texas stuff right now. I think he's just one of the best gadget players that you can ask for on a team, but it's just one of those things where that's still not going to command enough to hurt the top guys. And then I'm not a believer in Boykin. I mean, I think he's a good end zone target if he ends up developing a little bit further just because of his size. But at the same time, it's a lazy take on a player like that. I just don't think he's that talented. And so I see Marquise Brown taking a step forward, but with Lamar also taking a step forward passing, I think that creates the room for Marquise Brown to step forward while simultaneously Mark Andrews continuing to do what he's done. And so we seen him have the breakout last year, finishing at tight end two, and I think it was for real, and I think it's here to stay. I think he's now put himself in that tier with the first two, but it's one of those where like you still have a split tier, but he's in the elite group. So like I wouldn't take him with those two, but he is a guy where if I'm in a draft and I get to a certain point where I'm looking, I'm like that's going to be a significant advantage to have that kind of player at my tight end spot. He's one of the very few that are in the league that you're okay with walking out of a draft and taking him where he's going, because that's the thing with these tight ends is they're none of them are ever values. These early guys, they're going where they should be, and that's one thing that with a lot of us that tend to pride ourselves on being really good at drafting is the reason you do this. You take guys at values the entire draft, you end up with a very good team. And tight ends, when you make that decision, it's usually not out of value. It's because they're going to get you a security play at that spot. And so, but he's one of the very few that are at the top that I say, yeah, take him at his ADP because that is still a value because it's a security play.
Yeah, and I noticed in a lot of my leagues that when you see Kittle or Kelsey go, whoever goes second, Andrews is usually going about either a half round or to a round after that.
Yep.
Every now and then get somebody that goes back to back, but you kind of keep an eye on just kind of measuring if, Kittle's going late second or early third, that about 6 or 8 picks later, someone's going after Andrews. So that's kind of something to keep in mind as you're looking at picking up one of those top 2 or 3 tight ends. And Dallas, I'm just not sure. Just want to double check. You talked about Marquise Brown. What school did Marquise Brown go to?
Yeah.
And then the tight end we're talking about right now, I believe he also happened to go to.
But we had Duvernay.
You do.
But we're fully aware of what Oklahoma produces.
But other than the pedigree of the university, Mark Andrews just bring a lot of skill to the table that he also displayed a lot of OU. And so one of the big question marks from leaving the Baker Mayfield squad and OU was he going to be able to be a touchdown machine just like he was there? And he seemed to carry that over into this high-powered Ravens offense. And as much as I do like Duvernay and I'm not maybe as low as on Boykin, but just more from question marks and being high on him, is I still think that primary offer is going to run through Lamar and then to Andrews. And so I think with the high-powered run game in addition to Dobbins, it's going to put a little more play action possibilities there. And then with the removal of Hurst, I think early on there was a little bit of that like Hurst and Andrews and even Boyle, you didn't quite know who was going to be the tight end for that day. And I think with Andrews playing so well, kind of clears that picture up early. So you might have a faster start from Andrews. You will have a fast start from Andrews this year. I think that'll be helpful for your fantasy team.
Yeah, and that leads us to our number 4 tight end. You have him at 3. I have him at 4, and the reason it jumps us straight into that is that tight end is Zach Ertz. And prior to the Alshon injury, I had Andrews as the tier break, and I didn't take Ertz because he was still going pretty high in drafts, and whereas now, because of the injury, I'll let you dive a little bit deeper on it, but now he's right there too.
Yeah, I actually had to warm up to Zach Ertz. I was actually out on him because from my early conversations, it was like Kelsey Kittle Ertz, and I'm like, no, there's not Kelsey Kittle Ertz. It's Kelsey Kittle then Ertz. But kind of looking at when I actually figured it out when I was looking at targets for Michael Thomas, and I didn't realize how high Zach Ertz was like a top 10 or someone or so for targets in the NFL. And I was like, oh, yeah, And so once you start looking at the numbers in his catch rate, you see that how effective he actually is at tight end. And then how much the offense in Philly actually runs that 12 personnel and gets him in position to get the ball. It's really being a reliable target for Carson Wentz. And with all the question marks that we're not sure, we think Rigger's going to be good, but we don't know. And of course, all the injuries at wide receiver, for me, that just means there's a lot more opportunity to where they will be relying on a lot more to be successful, even with Goddard being there. Whereas Andrews, the people around him are becoming more developed and more skilled, so they may be relying on him less. So now, when I say less, he's still my tight end 4, but that's why I have Ertz higher than Andrews for my rankings.
Yeah, and I at first going into the offseason, I didn't have Ertz in that tier. I had Andrews there, but I thought Andrews was the tier break, and now because of Alshon being gone and we all know how much Wentz loves targeting Ertz. I mean, that's just a match made in heaven. It's a, I make the comparisons all the time of like the Romo Witten days where it just didn't matter what was going on the field. If it wasn't there, it was going to Witten every single time. If it was there, it was still probably going to Witten half the time because it was just such a reliable. It's somebody that he trusts wholeheartedly, and now it's somebody that he really has no choice. I mean, he has to throw it to him. And we've seen when these players around Ertz get hurt, his volume just goes through the roof. We saw it last year when guys starting to go down. He had that stretch where like people were starting to question. And the main reason Ertz has fallen for anybody is because of Goddard. But honestly, this is a team that runs so much 12 personnel that it doesn't matter when they have no weapons anywhere else because they're all hurt. I mean, we saw last year Ertz went through the roof when Goddard went down. So a lot of people make that argument all the time, like Goddard's a smash if Ertz goes down. I'm like, well, Goddard's the one that's been hurt, is currently most recently hurt again over something. It's a small thing, but like if Goddard goes down, Ertz also becomes a through the roof smash, and that's with everybody else there. But that's the thing is everybody else isn't there. The guys who are there, you have a rookie, a second year guy that really struggled last year. You have Greg Ward, who somebody, I mean, talent-wise, I like him, but we all know on a production-wise, like, he hasn't done anything to make me think he's going to come in and still work from Ertz. And then Deshaun Jackson's the one there, and we all know how much he gets hurt. I'm hoping that he doesn't. I'd really like Deshaun Jackson this year for his value, but that being said, the most secure part of this team, including the quarterback, is Zach Ertz. And I love Miles Sanders. And Zach Ertz is still the one that it does not matter what's going on. He's out there, he's going to be reliable, and he's going to get his work. And now that you have all these injuries around him, the gap isn't there for me anymore between him and Andrews. They're literally the same for me. I just think that Alshon does come back at some point. And so that's what drops Ertz for me slightly under Andrews in my rankings. But that's the tier gap where after those four are gone, I completely punt tight end for some of our next guys because I just think the upside for them are so much better than the cost that you have to pay for some of these other guys that, continually they're going around wide receivers that are just significantly better, and I just don't ever spend the price on them. So Ertz to me is an absolute smash as well.
Yep. And that brings us to our number 5 tight end, the Hayden Hurst. And we talked earlier about some of the guys that Dallas is really high on, and I don't know. He's in charge of a lot of fan clubs, but I think Hayden Hurst might be
the biggest one.
Might be the biggest one. You want to talk about why you're so high on Hayden Hurst?
All right, so for me, Hayden Hurst, there's a couple things. A lot of people, for some reason, have been making this argument with the whole Austin Hooper was Austin Hooper, and Hayden Hurst isn't going to come in and immediately demand what Austin Hooper got. I am on the side that doesn't think Austin Hooper was anything exceptional. I think he was in an exceptional position, but I honestly think as a talent, Hurst is better than Hooper. So I do see a world where he does better than what Hooper did with that role. That being said, I'm not projecting that by no means because Hooper was like the tight end one for like 5 or 6 weeks last year. But that was going into the offseason when I hadn't really done my deep dive into the tight ends. I had Hooper as pretty high in my mind. And he went to Cleveland. I was like, hey, I actually am okay with that because, Stefanski likes his tight ends. I'm fine with that. And then I went and actually looked at the sheer volume that Hooper got last year when he was doing well. And that's when I realized, okay, hold on a second. Like, maybe it wasn't just Hooper having a good year. This is actually a situation where whatever tight end's there is going to have a high floor. And then if you put an athletic, talented one there, you actually have a very, very high ceiling. And so this is a team that has by far the most vacated targets out there. And one argument I've heard a lot when people are trying to describe like where these are going to go, if it's Calvin Ridley or if it's Hayden Hurst, Todd Gurley's there now. Well, they always talk about the guys that left, but the one that everybody keeps forgetting, and I don't hear anybody name, is Mohamed Sanu. Mohamed Sanu is gone, and that role is filled by Gage. That's not somebody's going to demand the same target volume that Sanu was getting before he was traded. And so there's still a high ceiling for me personally with Hurst on a sheer volume level. And then if you look at the history of Matt Ryan, he's always had, even Jacob Tamme had a really good year, if you remember that one. I don't remember exact year, but this is somebody that, he got the opportunity and he did well with it. And then he had Tony Gonzalez at the back end of his career. And then you turn around and he's had Hooper the last couple of years where Hooper finally, I mean, it takes a little while for tight ends to develop usually in the NFL. Last year was that year where Hooper took that next step, and he was the tight end one before he went down. And so for me, Hurst has the athletic profile to actually really succeed in an offense like this. It's going to be a high-powered passing offense, but you also just look at the praise he's gotten. I mean, Matt Ryan is in love with the guy. I mean, every time you listen to him talk about him, he makes sure to make it a point to mention him, even if he's not even the one asked about. He'll talk about, yeah, Ridley looks really good. Julio's going to do what he does, but I'm really excited about the opportunity Hurst got. And he keeps coming back to the same thing, that he didn't think Hurst had a fair shot in Baltimore and thinks he's a lot better than what he's been perceived as because, again, he keeps saying he just didn't get the shot he deserved. And so I think everything is projected upwards for Hurst, and you get him. Unfortunately, people are starting to jump in on it. And so he's came down to like round 8, round 9 now, I've been noticing. But originally he's like double-digit rounds. But I still take him at round 8, round 9 because of where I have him projecting finish. Because around there you've got some other guys that are going that I look past him and I'm like, I've got one other guy that we'll talk about later that I like. But if I miss out on him, then it's just a huge drop-off. And I think Hurst is going to be kind of your, I won't say Darren Waller because he ended up the tight end 3 last year, but when you look at the jump that they made compared to what was expected upon them, I just think Hurst is in a position to, I think he has a very, very high floor and an even higher ceiling. And so for his value, he's somebody I get literally almost everywhere. There's this program that was created by at FF Legion Dan. It's called Dynasty Assistant. And when you put all your leagues in, it actually tells you like your shares of players. And Hayden Hurst, I have him in like almost every league that I could get him in. He's, like he said, I'm leading the train on the hype for Hayden Hurst. I will ride this the whole way. I guess Mark Andrews would be the best comparison of a guy you got super late last year and ended up breaking out. I genuinely believe that for Hayden Hurst. And if I'm wrong, then so be it. He's really not that expensive and doesn't burn you if you miss. And then you can just go into streaming tight ends like you probably planned on doing if you passed on the first guys anyway. But he's one of those that I think you can get late and then just end up start week in, week out.
Yeah. This is to our number 6 tight end, Darren Waller. I have Darren Waller at, actually, we both have Darren Waller at 6. Dallas, I know I have my feelings about Darren Waller, but maybe there's some of the similar thoughts. How do you feel about him?
Yeah, so this is one where I can tell why you were confused. Is I'm actually a lot lower on Darren Waller than most people are on a projection standpoint. But this kind of goes to speak a little bit more of like how much I think it drops off at a certain point, and Darren Waller's in that drop-off category for me. Darren Waller is somebody that I believe is being very, very misrepresented by his year he had last year, where a lot of people are thinking he's still the focal point of this team. And I just want to get something straight from the start. He at no point ever was. It's always been Josh Jacobs. That's something that I just wanted to clarify. And then now that you have all these other weapons here, if you go back and look last year at the weeks that Hunter Renfrow was healthy versus when he was injured, and look at the weeks that Waller did great and then struggled, they correlate directly. He's a PPR dependent tight end, and his targets went down significantly when there were other options on the field. Because you had Tyrell Williams get hurt, who this is a team that went into last year fully planning on having Antonio Brown. That's something a lot of people forget because he didn't even make it to game 1. And then they didn't have time because the season was starting. They couldn't adjust for that. And so Tyrell Williams was their new wide receiver 1. Tyrell Williams got injured. So now Hunter Renfrow was their wide receiver 1. So, and Waller was going to be a featured point of this offense, don't get me wrong, and he's going to be one of the better tight ends, but like his sheer volume was by circumstance. And now you have a healthy Renfrow. They got Algalore, who's apparently on a mission, according to him. I don't really read that much into him, but his kind of targets are the kind that you hope for your tight end to get. And then you've got, aside from his down the field, obviously, but then now you have Ruggs, who I think is, I'm very low on Ruggs more than most people on a talent side. I just think he was more of somebody that, I think he's a one-trick pony kind of thing, but hopefully he does better. But his targets are ones you want a tight end to get, those short little slant routes or those bubble screens that, you know, typically if the bubble's not there, they look a little bit further and throw it to the tight end. And then you've got Brian Edwards, who I've actually been coming around on a lot, now that I'm hearing that he's fully healthy, and that was the only reason his draft stock dropped was because of the injury. And he's somebody that was supposed to be a back end wide receiver, a back end round one draft pick, or an early two, and then fell all the way in the third to them. And they've all just given him high praise. And then Tyrell Williams is hurt again, but Brian Edwards kind of fills that spot on the concern side. So I just don't see him getting anywhere close to the volume he got last year. And so I do still have him at 6 because I think there's some touchdown upside because he really was one of those lower touchdown tight ends last year. And I watched multiple times where they targeted him and he just dropped it or barely missed it or something like that happened. But I think his touchdowns come up some, and so that's why I still have him at 6. But I think his volume goes a lot further down. And for those of people who are, because most people still treat him like he's going to do what he did last year, and I just think you're going to be disappointed if those are your expectations.
Yeah, and my thoughts on Darren Waller. I mean, last year the Raiders were kind of a mess. I mean, they were hoping for Antonio Brown, and then ended up with Marshawn Lynch. So I think this year with the kind of the supposed culture change, Josh Jacobs back healthy, adding in Brian Edwards, Henry Rugg. I mean, you're adding a lot of pieces to that team, and having a whole season of planning. Then I just think that's going to have a negative impact on Waller, but I still think he's going to be a tight end 1. It's just that's kind of that separation from, as Dallas said, kind of that first and second tier. There's kind of a big space in there between for me when it gets to Waller, to where Waller's a guy that I'll take if it's later and he's still there and I need a tight end, but not someone I'm specifically targeting, especially for being in the top 6.
Yeah, I mean, like you have Hurst at 7. And my guess is if I had to take a wild shot at it, you probably come out of more drafts with Hurst than you do Waller because of cost. Like for you, I have Hurst ahead of him, but you have him behind. But I'm sure the spread isn't enough for you to pay up for Waller like you have to, or just wait on some of these other guys who honestly have more upside. And I know the argument is, well, their upside is that they equal what Waller's going to get you, but like the cost is just the selling point here, where a lot of these guys are next to free, and Waller is like a 6th or 7th round tight end right now. He's still going very, very early because, like I said, a lot of people are still hoping for what he did last year. So.
Our number 7 tight end is Jonnu Smith. Now, Dallas, you've been like right on the button with a lot of these rankings here, where you have Jonnu right at 7. I have Jonnu all the way down at 11. So maybe we'll talk about why you have Jonnu at 7 on our rankings.
Yeah, I think it's. I think we got to see glimmers of it last year. He still had to fight with Delaney Walker, and that's the perfect comparison here. You usually don't see that, but I think they hit the nail right on the head when drafting Walker's replacement, because I think Jonnu's literally a slightly more used in a run game, I guess, version of Delaney Walker. I mean, he's going to be out there. You have a team that's going to be a run-first team that relies on Derrick Henry heavily, as well as a strong defense. And usually what coincides with those teams is a very solid tight end. Like, they're not going to be the ones that absolutely change your life like the Ertz and the Andrews, but they're going to be those guys that you can throw in every single week, not think twice about it, and be perfectly content with what your tight end is, and he's free in draft. And so Jonnu Smith has been another guy that I've been right up there. I mean, our buddy MJ Reller is probably the only person I know that's higher on him than I am, and we're both, we get him everywhere we can because he's free. I mean, that's like we were talking about our wide receiver episode, how we're always sniping each other with the wide receivers. That's the way me and MJ Reller are, where I know when it gets to those rounds, I got to go ahead and take him, because if not, he's gone because of him. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm in a redraft this year, most people don't even think twice about him, and you can get him at the very end. Sometimes he's undrafted. I mean, and when you look at some of these tight ends at the back, there's really not a whole lot of upside. You're just throwing darts on narratives that sound good. But this is somebody that I think has a very secure floor. And like I said, I don't think his ceiling is anything through the roof. But to get tight end 7 is not that difficult. And so that's why I have him at my tight end 7. And he's so cheap that he's the guy that I was talking about earlier with Hurst, where like after Hurst, he's the next guy that I get, because I have him at 7. I have Waller in between, but I'm never going to pay the price for Waller. And so I usually just wait, and then I get Jonnu in like the 11th, 12th, 13th, just to secure him, just in case I am in a league with somebody else that knows about him and just hasn't told, because he's like a lot of our us Jonu truthers, he's our little secret we like to keep because you can get him for free. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
he's somebody that, like I said, he's a very high floor security play that I think you can throw in week in, week out and not have to think twice about it. He's going to get, he's going to get you your solid 11, 12 points. And then if he falls into an end zone, get you 20. So it's one of those that I think he's a great play, especially for price. He's probably the best valued tight end there is.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, those are all good points about Jonu. I typically miss out on him just because I'm either grabbed really early tight end and he's not quite worth the capital to be my backup, or one of you guys kind of snagged him right before
Yeah.
I was able to do so.
Yeah, he's just one of those guys. And I'm guilty of it. I forgot about him in one draft, and then he went, and I was so upset about it because I was like, how did I forget to grab Jonu? And he went like 2 rounds later. But it was one of those where I had gotten one of the early guys, and so like I wasn't that upset over it. But that was why I forgot to grab him.
Right.
Yeah, so he's a great floor play. Keep your eye out on him. He's basically free, so he's probably the best value pick at tight end I could give you this year. I'd say Jay agrees with that.
Yep. And that's a good segue for the next guy. Speaking of hype, Mike Gesicki, our number 8 tight end, he has been really on the trending list for tight ends, and so he's a guy that I'm relatively high on. I mean, he's my number 9 tight end. But right now, he's not a guy that I'm typically buying because at times he is going before our 7, our 6, and sometimes our 7 tight end, just because of kind of the end of the season and a lot of the Mike Gesicki hype. Dallas, for you at on Mike G.
Yeah, I mean, with him, he's one that you really can't look at his ADP. Whenever you feel like the time is right, based on how the draft is going, take him because he's somebody that almost everybody is starting to hear about, and so he's going a few rounds earlier than his ADP usually suggests that you should take him. He's a high upside play with a decently high floor. It just depends. He's the main reason why I'm not on the Preston Williams hype train that a lot of people have been on, where they were talking about how Preston Williams he got injured and that's why Gesicki started doing great, and that's true. They do correlate directly with each other, but I lean more on the side of they didn't really fully understand what they had in Gesicki until Preston Williams got hurt, and now they realize that we've got to get this guy implemented. And so I think he's going to be one of those. Another guy that I like to compare is he's like a very athletic, so don't take this comparison as a player profile comparison, but as a production, he's a Jason Witten where he's just going to get you that 9 to 10 points every single week, doesn't ever lose you a week kind of tight end. I mean, obviously he can, but for the most part, he's not going to lose you a week, and then every now and then he's going to have those big upside plays. He's one that's benefited from the fact that they had multiple of their wide receivers opt out of the season. And so, although there was some volume questions with Preston Williams coming back, I really don't think there's going to be much now because it's Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, and him. I mean, they don't have. I mean, Breida could eat into that some. That's one thing people haven't really looked into a whole lot. So I will say that there is that question mark. So depending on how early he's going, maybe pass, but for the most part, he should be a very secure tight end with his floor, and so he's another really good value. Probably the next best value in drafts after Jonu when it comes to tight ends. And that leads us to our number 9 tight end, which is Hunter Henry. You have him at 8, I believe, and I have him at 11. And so I'm going to go ahead and let you explain why you got him a little bit higher, and then I'll jump in why I'm lower on him.
Yeah, Hunter Henry is the guy that, as you guys hear in our conversation, I typically run to people that a lot of guys are running from. He's kind of fallen out of grace with his injuries, but a healthy Hunter Henry with Tyrod Taylor or Justin Herbert is going to be productive. He's going to be a big body, a big target that they can reach out to. He had some weeks last year to where he was great, and I think had a lot of time to recover. And so I have him, right around that 8-9 range. And a guy that, if you think back to when you were drafting tight ends last year, you were picking him a lot sooner, and he's not a worse player. And so just thinking about the value of the quality of player you're getting, and that top 8 tight end, if you're getting him pretty late, you're getting a really nice tight end. And so somebody that I probably will have one or two of tight ends for the season, just because of some of the injury. But I don't want to bank off play for injury concerns, and you'll see that reflected in a couple of my rankings. That in a redraft league, you want to be mindful of injuries, but you don't want to get too caught up in the fact that someone might get hurt. So Dallas, what's your thoughts on Hunter Henry?
So for me, Henry is one of those guys that I usually don't touch ever any year just because of the injuries, and because I can usually grab guys later that I like better. And so he kind of, for me, it depends on if you're a Hunter Henry truther, you're all about him this year because, like you said, his talent didn't change. He's just where he was injured last year. His ADP has fallen, but for the most part, everything sounds like he's healthy again. But if you were somebody like me who thinks he's a risk and you're really not that big on him to start with, his ADP didn't quite fall low enough yet to where I just decide I'm going to pull the trigger because, like I said, I still would rather have Hayden Hurst, who goes right around him now, and then Jonnu Smith, who goes rounds later. And so for me, he's just not a guy I ever land with. That being said, like if you are on the side that still thinks he's got it and still thinks he's just as talented as he was, he's at a great value this year because, like you said, he's usually round 5 or 6 when you have to take him, and now he's like 8 and 9 because of the injury. So for me, it's more so there's just guys behind him I like better, but it's one of those where, like you said, regardless of quarterback, his usage should be the same regardless. And I'm just one of those where I don't know. He's one of those, I'll believe it when I see it for him making it through a season, which is another guy we're going to mention later. And so that's why I'm lower on him. But that being said, I fully respect the talent. It's more so I don't know his availability, and that's why I'm not huge on him.
Yeah. I think it's to our number 10 tight end is Jarrett Cook. As I talked about before, I'm not a huge believer in the Saints wide receivers core. But every time I doubt Jarrett Cook, he comes out and has a great year, or just does great for us. So Dallas, where are you at on Jarrett Cook?
Jarrett Cook, I really don't have a whole lot to say other than I think his volume may go up a little bit this year, because last year he was at such an efficiency rate. I don't see how he duplicates that. I mean, you go and look at like his touchdown ratio. I don't remember what it was. Like 25% of his catches were touchdowns.
Yeah,
it was some
like
ridiculous number that I do not see repeating. So I could see his touchdowns coming down a little bit, but I think the team knows a little bit better what they have in him now. Last year, if you remember, was his first year with the team, and the year prior he was like the tight end 4 with the Raiders. So like his talent wise, he's there, and so I think you're going to use him a little bit more, especially. And that's another reason why, if you look at our wide receivers episode, I had Adams ahead of Thomas because I think between Sanders and Cook, I think they're both going to get a little bit more volume. I think Kamara's going to get back to a little bit more volume as well, and I think Kamara is somebody that actually helps Jarrett Cook out quite a bit because it's one more person that defenses are going to pay attention to before they look Cook's way. And I think he's just going to be one of those guys that just finds himself wide open in the middle of the field all the time. I mean, you saw it last year. His touchdown catches were usually like 20 yards down the field where nobody was paying attention to him, and he's just wide open. So I think he's for his price, he's one of the better tight ends to grab. He's almost a consistent round 9. Round 10. I've been seeing a lot of people do the Breeze Cook stack because you can take them like back to back in drafts, and that's something that, I mean, every time he gets a touchdown, if he gets one a game, then great. I mean, he showed last year he's one of the prominent end zone targets. I definitely think a lot of that had to do with Kamara's lack of touchdowns last year, and I think that comes up. So that's why I think his touchdowns come down, but I think his usage comes up. So he's one of those guys that I think he's going where he should be, and he's going to deliver where he's going. So
all
right, that leads us to our number 11 tight end, which is Evan Ingram. I have him at 17, and Jay has him at 5. So there's a huge discrepancy probably out of all of our rankings we've done. This is probably the biggest discrepancy at an individual player we've had. So I'll let you kick off while you're high on him, and I'll kick off while I'm low.
Yeah, I mean, I this is a huge discrepancy. But as I said in I think the running back episode, I don't necessarily draft based on fear. I mean, in my redraft leagues every year, some random person has been injured and been out 6-8 weeks. So it's like, I mean, I don't want to start the season that way, but there's something definitely to be mindful of when you're looking at players. But Evan Ingram, to me, when he was healthy, was getting insane amount of targets, insane amount of volume, and I think that's already in the plans for this year for the Giants. He's looking great at camp. They're going to give the guy the ball. I mean, he's a ball hawk. I mean, he's basically overweight wide receiver. And so I really have him that high. And for me, him being my fifth ranked tight end, depending upon your type of league, he's falling. I mean, he's falling down, kind of like Dallas's range for tight end. And for me, that's always going to be a smash, especially if I can grab someone else with a high ceiling type guy as well, just in case. But as far as ability or how highly rated the tight end it is, or I think perform, Evan was a top 5 for me. But I definitely understand that the risk in the injury. But I'm not going to necessarily do an injury ranking because I mean, as far as tight ends, I mean, there's probably 5 or 6 guys down this list we could say that we could consider injury prone. And so I just want to stick them where I think the talent level is.
Yeah, for me, I kind of went more on the where I think he'll finish kind of thing. And I'm not going to hold back here and try to spin it in a way that doesn't sound like it was injury based. It's 100% injury based. If you look at talent wise, I had him at tight end 4 last year going into the season. I think talent wise, he's one of the best upside plays. For me, he's somebody that his ADP is still like 5th, 6th round. And it's kind of the same as Hunter Henry was, where like that's still just too expensive for somebody who's out on him injury wise for me to spend up. But for people who are still in on him, that's a discount compared to what he cost last year. But if you remember last year, like both him and OJ Howard were like your round 4 tight ends, and they just absolutely let down. And luckily, I didn't draft him anywhere because I usually don't take tight ends that early. That's not one of the top guys, so I didn't get burned by him. So it isn't one of those, oh, he burned me now, I don't want him kind of takes. It's just one of those where I genuinely, I mean, there were reports coming out early in the offseason where they were trying to trade him because they just the team themselves said they didn't believe he could finish an entire season. And if the people who are closest to him every day doing the medical work on him, looking at him, just genuinely have lost faith that he's going to be available the whole season, I've lost faith as well. That being said, you'd be silly to say that if he played a whole season, he would finish as low as I have him. So full discrepancy. My ranking is based on him. I don't think he's going to finish the whole season. I don't think he's going to play enough to be one of the top guys. But if he does play a full season, yeah, I mean, he's going to be probably the tight end 4. I mean, well, maybe not 4, maybe 5. It just depends. I mean, he could be the 4 if his usage is enough. That's how good he is on a skill-based side. Like you said, he's basically a wide receiver playing tight end. And when you have those kind of guys like the Vernon Davises of the world, where they're just a mismatch for linebackers. They can't keep up with them, and they just get open. And so while he plays, he's going to do well. So he's somebody that if he slips past where he's going now, and you're in a draft where everybody's passing on him, and he falls down to that 8th, 9th round, then I'd probably take him at that point just for the upside play, and I'd play him till he got hurt. And so it's one of those where if you do take him, I think you 100% need to turn right around and make sure you get Gesicki or Jonu or one of those Cook, one of those guys with the high floors, just to make sure that if the Ingram plan doesn't roll out, then great. But if he ends up staying healthy, then I mean he's a league-winning kind of draft pick where he's fell, and so it's just one of those where I'm not gonna. I don't do projections based on injuries, but if I'm gonna rank somebody, it's going to be based on where I think they're going to finish. And for me, I think it's just significantly lower because of injury, because I don't know how many games we're going to have him. But the games we do have him, he should be great. So if you end up getting him, just secure him with somebody and not his backup. Like, what is it, Caden Smith? I mean, they're going to look elsewhere. It's not one of those where next man up kind of tight end situations. He is one of those very gifted players that demands the targets at tight end position when he's out there. So it's not one of those he goes down and the next guy up. So make sure you secure him with another tight end later on. But that's the discrepancy there. Is it's a 100% injury thing on my end. And it's not that I draft based on risk. It's that I just think there's other guys I can get after that I like better. And so I just pass on them every time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally get that.
All right, so our number 12 tight end is Noah Fant. I have him at 9, and you have him at 14. So I'm going to go ahead and let you kick off why you have him at 14, and then I'll explain why I'm a little bit higher on him than most.
Yeah, I overall, we haven't talked too much about the Broncos. They don't have many players in our top 12 rankings, but I'm somewhat low on the Broncos just because I think I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to put all the pieces together. They're like a budget Rams team,
Yeah.
and so in adding Judy and having Sutton and having Gordon and having Lindsey. I think Fan will get some targets. I just don't see him getting the type of volume as the other guys, just because there's a lot of different pieces to figure out, and Drew Lock's still kind of still figuring out as the quarterback of that team. So I have him at 14, so I think he could fall in that range. But that 8 to 14 range for tight ends, I mean, it's kind of just kind of a shot in the dark about where they will finish. But Dallas, do you have any thoughts on Noah Fant? Because you have him a lot higher than I do.
Yeah, so for me with Noah Fant, it's there's a couple factors that go into this. One, I was a believer of Drew Lock coming out of college, and then I actually was shocked to see where he went, but I also wasn't quite up in the analysis that everybody had, where like people expected him to go where he was drafted, and I hadn't been keeping up with it, and I remember I was like, wasn't he supposed to be like one of the top quarterbacks out of this class?
Right.
And then I seen him fall, and he went to the Broncos. So I actually in Dynasty League last year, I drafted him in startup in like round 15 and just threw him on my taxi. So I was like,
Yeah.
he was drafted to be the guy. He's just they fell to round 2. They didn't have to spin up for him, and then he came out and he did show a few question marks that make you question how good he can be. But the one thing that I saw that I really liked seeing from the start was his connection with Fant. That's something that was another like budget Roma Witten connection that I was seeing, where right away that was just somebody that Fant or that was somebody that Locke just continually went with. Like Sutton had a great year last year, but people forget it was primarily with Flacco. Flacco was when Sutton was doing well. The main receiver that had success there was actually the tight end Fant with Locke. And so I think that of all the pieces with this season, with COVID going on, shortened off season, I think the one question mark that isn't there for me is their connection. They're just on the same page, and I think he's going to be one of those safe floor plays week in, week out, and he's at a great price to where I don't worry about him as much as others do. I think he's going to return value where you draft him. I don't think he has a very high ceiling at all, but he's somebody that I think he's going to get you the 8 to 12 points a week. But he also, we saw last year, is one of the very few tight ends that can catch a pass and then take it 40 yards to the house. I mean, because he did it multiple times. And so he's somebody with a high upside that, I mean, if you haven't really looked into him, I think you should. He's cheap enough. He'd be another good candidate to draft behind an Ingram if you got an Ingram. So for me, it's more of I think he's a safe floor kind of play. All right, so that's been our top 12 tight ends. Thank you guys for tuning in. We are going to mention 2 more guys here, though, just before we head out. The first one is Tyler Higbee, just because he's somebody that a lot of people are trying to figure out. They don't really know how to gauge. He's going as a tight end 1 in most drafts, and just kind of a explanation on why neither one of us have him there. We're not super low on him, but neither one of us have him as a tight end 1. I have him currently as a 14, and Jay has him at 15, so I'll go ahead and let Jay kind of explain. I'm pretty sure we're on the same page with him.
Yeah, I mean, you've probably seen the narratives of just the difference between Higbee and Everett, and I just don't see Higbee getting the type of volume to be warrant being a tight end 1. I don't know that he's a better tight end than Everett, and I don't know if the Rams really know that question themselves. So I just see maybe some split work there, or not even being the guy to where I'm not paying that risk for him.
Yeah, I'm the exact same way. Like I fully believe in the 12 personnel narrative. I think they're about to start using that a whole lot more because they saw success. My thing is an Everett thing. I just think Everett's a lot better than people are giving him credit or remembering. And I personally think that they're just going to split enough to where neither one of them are relevant. I definitely think Higbee of the 2 is going to finish the season higher just because of what he showed last year. I think he earned his way into being the tight end 1, but I don't know how much that means in that offense when the tight end 2 is going to be right there behind it. It's kind of like a very dulled down version of your Ertz Goddard type situation where the gap isn't as far as theirs are, but I don't think either of them are going to finish at once, and I think Everett's going to hurt him just enough to where he doesn't return the value in drafts that you have to pay, and so neither one of us are drafting him anywhere.
Our second tight end we will talk about is T.J. Hawkinson. I have Hawkinson at 13. Dallas has Hawkinson at 15. You'll talk about him a little bit and what thoughts you have.
Yeah, so with Hawkinson, I think we all kind of got the letdown last year because he was like the most picked up player after week one, where some people drafted him for the upside, mainly Lions fans, and then he came out and absolutely exploded week one, and then just disappeared. Did not do it. Did not show signs of it at all again. And there's some injuries involved, and then with Stafford going down, I think he's somebody that we don't know about yet, and so there is still we saw what his ceiling is, and so
Right.
he's another one of those guys that you can take a very late round shot at and just kind of stash him if you need to. I don't know that I would start him week one until I got to see kind of what his usage is now with everybody healthy, especially if Swift's healthy. If Swift's not healthy, I'd still kind of hold off as well to see once
Right.
Swift gets involved what his usage is going to be. But he's somebody that, I mean, he's got a. I don't know that he really has a floor, but we don't know what his ceiling is yet. And
Mhm.
so he's worth the pick because his ceiling technically would be week one of last year. So, I mean, he's
Right.
somebody that we don't know about yet. So I'll let Jay explain a little bit more why he has him a little bit higher than I do.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that I heard the narratives about Hawkinson in college and playing the H back, and if you play the H, it's like a quasi tight mix of a tight end and a or a tight end and a running back or a fullback. And if you play the H, you got to know multiple positions. And so I think that giving the tight ends always take a while to figure things out. And so I think just giving he had that first early week, which anyone could have in that particular context. So I think with another year on his belt, just being on the same page, I just see it, and also having Matthew Stafford back. I just really think that. Hawk's gonna have a good year, and then especially where I'm able to grab him. It's so late because of the injury concerns. You're able to grab Hawk in a lot of leagues. So that's really easy and simple of why I'm higher than Hawkinson on probably most. So with having Stafford back, and then with the addition of Swift, and then just the clarity of the roles of Galladay and Jones, I mean, they kind of know where they are going through the season now. I think Hawkinson's going to have a good year, but again, I only have him at 13, so I'm not saying he's going to be the tight end one. I'm just saying at the price you can buy Hawkinson right now, it's a pretty good value because everyone's out on him, and so a couple of guys that I don't mind taking fire on. Ingram, like I said, and Hawkinson as well. But you want to have a nice high floor guy just to pair with him that you can also get late. So you talking about like streaming tight ends.
Yeah.
That's something I also consider there. But that's definitely a guy I have in a lot of leagues because he doesn't cost me very much. And your reward is a lot higher than your risk of drafting those guys.
Yeah, and that's another thing we didn't really mention a whole lot during this episode is the fact that a lot of these guys, once you get to this back part, you're going to be streaming your tight end a lot. And Hawkinson is one of those guys that you may pick up to stream, and then he ends up doing better than you expected. And so you
Right.
hold on to him, and then you end up just keeping him for the rest of the season because
Yeah.
he's been a safe floor. And so he's somebody that you can take late in drafts and then kind of find out pretty, as long as Swift's healthy week one, you can kind of figure out right away like just how valuable he's going to be. And if
Mhm.
he's going to be really valuable, then great, you got a great value. And if not, you can probably drop him and then just pick him back up again. I usually say like 2 weeks before their good matchup if you've got the roster space for it. You don't want to wait till the rest of the world has came into channels like ours, giving you the waiver wire pickups of the week, and
Right.
then everybody's going to be jumping in and taking him when you thought you could stash him. And so that's the best thing to do with a lot of these guys. Try to look further than just one step ahead,
Right.
especially close to playoff times. Look at the playoff matchup and stuff like that. So tied into somebody like if you don't get it one of those top tier guys, you usually end up streaming them anyway. And
Right.
Hawkinson is one of those guys that has like we said, a pretty good ceiling if things fall the right way, and you'll know pretty quickly if they're going to or not. So,
Yeah.
but that's been our tight ends episode. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hopefully, you guys have been enjoying these. Got all of our rankings out. Starting next week, you'll be getting our normal form podcast. We just tried to get all these rankings out before draft season ended. But you'll start to see some interesting segments we've got planned. You'll probably see some short individual videos, so keep an eye out for that. They aren't all going to be these long forms. So is there anything else you want to add, Jay?
No. Good luck just drafting this season.
Yep. Thank you guys for choosing us to help you with your drafts and give us feedback on stuff that helped you, things you want to give us input on. Best place to find us is on Twitter at DallasFFO and at Pick on the Block. We do have our official channel Twitter now at the FF Outpost that you can go check out as well. And basically, that's a really good way to reach us. The FF Outpost channel will be a good place to see anytime we upload new content. So make sure you go turn the notifications on for them as well. And thank you guys for tuning in and being along and share us around. And we appreciate all the support. We'll
Thanks,
see you.
guys. Thank
See
you.
you.
See ya.